We are now starting chapter 11, The Childlike Empress. Knitting his brow, powerless to utter a single word, Atreyu stood gazing at the childlike empress. He had no idea how to begin or what to do. He had often tried to imagine this moment. He had prepared words and phrases, but they had all gone out of his head. At length she smiled at him. Her voice, when she spoke, was as soft as the voice of a bird singing in its sleep. "You have returned from the great quest, Atreyu." Atreyu hung his head. "Yes," he managed to say. After a short silence, she went on. "Your lovely cloak has turned grey. Your hair is grey, and your skin is like stone. But all that will be as it was, or better. You'll see." Atreyu felt as if a band had tightened around his throat. All he could do was nod his head. And then he heard the sweet, soft voice saying, "You have carried out your mission." Were these words meant as a question? Atreyu didn't know. He didn't dare look up to read the answer in her face. Slowly he reached for the golden amulet and removed the chain from his neck. Without raising his eyes, he held it out to the childlike empress. He tried to kneel as messengers did in the stories and songs he had heard at home, but his wounded leg refused to do his bidding. He fell at the childlike empress's feet, and there he lay with his face on the floor. She bent forward, picked up Orin, and let the chain glide through her fingers. "You have done well," she said, "and I am pleased with you." "No!" cried Atreyu, almost savagely. "It was all in vain. There's no hope." A long silence followed. Atreyu buried his face in the crook of his elbow, and his whole body trembled. How would she react? With a cry of despair, a moan, words of bitter reproach, or even anger? Atreyu couldn't have said what he expected. Certainly not what he heard. Laughter. A soft, contented laugh. Atreyu's thoughts were in a whirl. For a moment he thought she had gone mad. But that was not the laughter of madness. Then he heard her say, "But you've brought him with you." Atreyu looked up. "Who?" "Our savior." He looked into her eyes and found only serenity. She smiled again. "Golden-eyed commander of wishes," he stammered, now for the first time using the official words of address that Falkor had recommended. No, really, I don't understand." "I can see by the look on your face," she said. "But whether you understand or not, you've done it. And that's what counts, isn't it?" Atreyu said nothing. He couldn't even think of a question to ask. He stood there, open-mouthed, staring at the childlike empress. "I saw him," she went on, "and he saw me." "When?" Atreyu asked. "Just as you came in. You brought him with you." Involuntarily, Atreyu looked around. "Then where is he? I don't see anyone but you and me." "Oh, the world is full of things you don't see. You can believe me, he isn't in our world yet. But our worlds have come close enough together for us to see each other. For a twinkling, the thin wall between us became transparent. He will be with us soon, and then he will call me by my new name that he alone can give me. Then I shall be well, and so will Fantastica." As the childlike empress was speaking, Atreyu raised himself with difficulty. He looked up to her as she lay on her bed of cushions. His voice was husky when he asked, "Then you've known my message all along? What Morla the Aged One told me in the swamps of sadness, what the mysterious voice of Uyulala in the southern oracle revealed to me, you knew it all?" "Yes," she said. "I knew it before I sent you on the great quest." Atreyu gulped. "Why?" he finally managed to ask. Why did you send me then? What did you expect me to do?" "Exactly what you did," she replied. "What I did?" Atreyu repeated slowly. His forehead clouded over. "In that case," he said angrily, "it was all unnecessary. There was no need of sending me on the great quest. I've heard that your decisions are often mysterious. That may be, but after all I've been through, I hate to think that you were just having a joke at my expense." The childlike Empress's eyes were grave. "I was not having a joke at your expense, Atreyu," she said. "I am well aware of what I owe you. All your sufferings were necessary. I sent you on the great quest, not for the sake of the message you would bring me, but because that was the only way of calling our Savior. He took part in everything you did, and he has come all that long way with you. You heard his cry of fear when you were talking with Igramul besides the deep chasm, and you saw him when you stood facing the magic mirror gate. You entered into his image and took it with you, and he followed you, because he saw himself through your eyes. And now, too, he can hear every word we are saying. He knows we are talking about him. He knows we have set our hope in him and are expecting him. Perhaps he even understands that all the hardship you, Atreyu, took upon yourself was for his sake, and that all Fantastica is calling him." Little by little the darkness cleared from Atreyu's face. After a while he asked, "How can you know all that? The cry by the deep chasm and the image in the magic mirror, did you arrange it all in advance?" The childlike Empress picked up Orin and said, "While putting the chain around her neck, didn't you wear the gem the whole time? Didn't you know that through it I was always with you?" "Not always," said Atreyu. "I lost it." "Yes. Then you were really alone. Tell me what happened to you then." Atreyu told her the story. "Now I know why you turned grey," said the childlike Empress. "You were too close to the nothing." "Gmork, the werewolf, told me," said Atreyu, "that when a Fantastican is swallowed up by the nothing, he becomes a lie. Is that true?" "Yes, it is true," said the childlike Empress, and her golden eyes darkened. "All lies were once creatures of Fantastica. They are made of the same stuff, but they have lost their true nature and become unrecognizable. But as you might expect from a half-and-half creature like Gmork, he told you only half the truth. There are two ways of crossing the dividing line between Fantastica and the human world, a right one and a wrong one. When Fantasticans are cruelly dragged across it, that's the wrong way. When humans, children of men, come to our world of their own free will, that's the right way. Every human who has been here has learned something that could be learned only here, and returned to his own world a changed person. Because he has seen creature in your true form, he was able to see his own world and his fellow humans with new eyes. Where he had seen only dull, everyday reality, he now discovered wonders and mysteries. That is why humans were glad to come to Fantastica, and the more these visits enriched our world, the fewer lies there were in theirs, the better it became. Just as our two worlds can endure each other, they can also make each other whole again." For a time, both were silent. Then she went on. "Humans are our hope. One of them must come and give me a new name, and he will come." Atreyu made no answer. "Do you understand now, Atreyu?" she asked. "Why I had to ask so much of you? Only a long story full of adventures, marvels, and dangers could bring our Savior to me, and that was your story." Atreyu sat, deep in thought. At length he nodded. Yes, golden-eyed commander of wishes, now I understand. I thank you for choosing me. Forgive my anger. You had no way of knowing these things, she answered, and that too was necessary. Again, Atreyu nodded. After a short silence, he said, But I'm very tired. You've done enough, Atreyu. Would you like to rest? Not yet. First, I would like to see the happy outcome of my story. If, as you say, I've carried out my mission, why isn't the Savior here yet? What's he waiting for? Yes, said the childlike Empress softly. What is he waiting for? Bastian felt his hands growing moist with excitement. I can't do it, he said. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. Maybe the name I've thought of isn't the right one. May I ask you another question? Said Atreyu. Of course, she answered with a smile. Why do you need a new name to get well? Only the right name gives beings and things their reality, she said. A wrong name makes everything unreal. That's what lies do. Maybe the Savior doesn't yet know the right name to give you. Oh, yes, he does, she assured him. Again, they sat silent. I know it all right, said Bastian. I knew it the moment I laid eyes on her, but I don't know what I have to do. Atreyu looked up. Maybe he wants to come and just doesn't know how to go about it. All he has to do, said the childlike Empress, is to call me by my new name, which he alone knows. Nothing more. Bastian's heart pounded. Should he try? What if he didn't succeed? What if he was wrong? What if they weren't talking about him, but about some entirely different Savior? How could he be sure they really meant him? Could it be, said Atreyu after a while, that he doesn't know it's him and not somebody else we're talking about? No, said the childlike Empress. Not after all the signs he has had. He can't be that stupid. I'll give it a try, said Bastian, but he couldn't get a word out of his mouth. What if it actually worked? Then he would somehow be transported to Fantastica. But how? Maybe he would have to go through some sort of change. And what would that be like? Would it hurt? Would he lose consciousness? And did he really want to go to Fantastica? He wanted to go to Atreyu and the childlike Empress, but he wasn't all that keen on all those monsters the place was smarming with. Maybe he hasn't got the courage, Atreyu suggested. Courage, said the childlike Empress. Does it take courage to say my name? Then, said Atreyu, I can think of only one thing that may be holding him back. And what would that be? After some hesitation, Atreyu blurted out, He just doesn't want to come here. He just doesn't care about you or Fantastica. We don't mean a thing to him. The childlike Empress stared wide-eyed at Atreyu. No, no, Bastian cried out. You mustn't think that. It's not that at all. Oh, please, please, don't think that. Can you hear me? It's not like that. Atreyu! He promised me he would come, said the childlike Empress. I saw it in his eyes. Yes, that's true, and I will come soon. I just need time to think. It's not so simple. Atreyu hung his head, and the two of them waited a long while in silence. But the Savior did not appear, and there wasn't the slightest sign to suggest that he was trying to attract their attention. Bastian was thinking of how it would be if he suddenly stood before them in all of his fatness, with his bow legs and his pasty face. He could literally see the disappointment in the childlike Empress's face when she said to him, "What brings you here?" And Atreyu might even laugh. The thought brought a blush to Bastian's cheeks. Obviously they were expecting a prince, or at any rate some sort of hero. He just couldn't appear before them. It was out of the question. He would do anything for them. Anything but that. When at last the childlike Empress looked up, The expression on her face had changed. Atreyu was almost frightened at its grandeur and severity. He knew where he had once seen that expression, in the Sphinxes. "There is one more thing I can do," she said, "but I don't like it, and I wish you wouldn't make me." "What is that?" Atreyu asked in a whisper. Whether he knows it or not, he is already part of the Neverending story. He can no longer back out of it. He made me a promise and he has to keep it, but by myself I can't make him. "Who in all of Fantastica," Atreyu asked, "can do what you cannot?" "Only one person," she replied, "if he wants to. The old man of Wandering Mountain." Atreyu looked at the childlike empress in amazement. "The old man of Wandering Mountain?" he repeated, stressing every word. "You mean he exists?" "Did you doubt it?" "The old folk in our tent camps tell the children about him when they're naughty. They say he writes everything down in a book, whatever you do or fail to do, and there it stays in the form of a beautiful or an ugly story. When I was little, I believed it, but then I decided it was only an old wives' tale to frighten children." "You never can tell about old wives' tales," she said with a smile. "Then you know him?" Atreyu asked. "You've seen him?" She shook her head. "If I find him," she said, "it will be our first meeting." "Our old folks also say," Atreyu went on, "that you never can know where the old mountain will be at any particular time. They say that when he appears, it's always unexpectedly, now here, now there, and that you can only run across him by accident or because the meeting was fated." "That's true," said the childlike empress. "You can't look for the old man of Wandering Mountain. You can only find him." "Does that go for you too?" "Yes," she said, "for me too." "But what if you don't find him?" "If he exists, I'll find him," she said with a mysterious smile. Her answer puzzled Atreyu. Hesitantly he asked, Is he like you?" "He is like me," she replied, "because he is my opposite in every way." Atreyu saw that with such questions he would get nothing out of her, and another thought weighed on him. "You are deathly sick, golden-eyed commander of wishes," he said almost sternly. "You won't go far by yourself. All your servants and courtiers seem to have abandoned you. Falkor and I would be glad to take you wherever you wish, but frankly, I don't know if Falkor has the strength, and my foot, well, you've seen that it won't carry me." "Thank you, Atreyu," she said. "Thank you for your brave and loyal offer, but I'm not planning to take you with me. To find the old man of Wandering Mountain, one must be alone. And even now, Falkor is not where you left him. He has been moved to a place where his wounds will be healed and his strength renewed, and you too, Atreyu, will soon be in that same place." Her fingers played with Orin. "What place is that?" "There's no need for you to know that now. You will be moved in your sleep, and one day you will know where you were." "But how can I sleep?" cried Atreyu, so shaken that he lost his sense of tact. "How can I sleep when I know you may die any minute?" The childlike empress laughed softly. "I'm not quite as forsaken as you think. I've already told you that there are some things you cannot hope to understand. I have my 7 powers, which belong to me, as your memory or courage or thoughts belong to you. They cannot be seen or heard, and yet they are with me at this moment. I shall leave 3 of them with you and Falkor to look after you, and I shall take the other 4 with me as my escort. You needn't worry, Atreyu. You can sleep easy." At these words, all the accumulated weariness of the great quest descended on Atreyu like a dark veil. Yet it was not the leaden weariness of exhaustion, but a gentle longing for sleep. He still had many questions to ask the golden-eyed commander of wishes, but he felt that her last words had vanquished all his wishes but one, the wish for sleep. His eyes closed, and still in a sitting position, he glided into the darkness. The clock in the steeple struck 11. As though far in the distance, Mathieu heard the childlike empress give an order in a soft voice. Then he felt powerful arms lifting him gently and carrying him away. For a long time, all was dark and warm around him. Much later, he half awoke with a soothing liquid touched his parched lips and ran down his throat. He had a vague impression that he was in a great cave with walls of gold. He saw the white luck dragon lying beside him, and then he saw, or thought he saw, a gushing fountain in the middle of the cave, encircled by two snakes, a light one and a dark one, which were biting each other's tail. But then an invisible hand brushed over his eyes. The feel of it was infinitely soothing, and again he fell into a deep and dreamless sleep. At that moment, the childlike empress left the ivory tower. She lay bedded on soft silken cushions in a glass litter, which seemed to be moving under its own power, but was actually being carried by 4 of the empress's invisible servants. They crossed the labyrinth garden, or rather what was left of it, making frequent detours since many of the paths ended in the nothing. When, at length, they left the labyrinth, the invisible carriers stopped. They seemed to be waiting for a command. The childlike empress sat up on her cushions and cast a glance back at the ivory tower. Then, sinking back, she said, "Keep going, just keep going, no matter where." Blown by the wind, her snow-white hair trailed behind the glass litter like a flag. Chapter 12. The Old Man of Wandering Mountain. Long thundering avalanches descended from the heights. Snowstorms raged between towering high-coated summits, dipped into hollows and ravines, and swept howling onwards over the great white expanse of the glaciers. Such weather was not at all unusual for this part of the country, for the Mountain of Destiny, that was its name, was the highest in all Fantastica, and its peak literally jutted into the heights of heaven. Not even the most intrepid mountain climbers ventured into those fields of everlasting ice. It had been so very, very long since anyone had succeeded in climbing this mountain that the feat had been forgotten. For one of Fantastica's many strange laws decreed that no one could climb the Mountain of Destiny until the last successful climber had been utterly forgotten. Thus, anyone who managed to climb it would always be the first. No living creature could survive in that icy waste, except for a handful of gigantic ice glumps, who could barely be called living creatures, for they moved so slowly that they needed years for a single step and whole centuries for a short walk. Which meant, of course, that they could only associate with their own kind and knew nothing at all about the rest of Fantastica. They thought of themselves as the only living creatures in the universe. Consequently, they were puzzled to the point of consternation when they saw a tiny speck twinning its way upward over perilous crags and razor-sharp ridges, then vanishing into deep chasms and crevices, only to reappear higher up. That speck was the childlike Empress's glass litter, still carried by 4 of her invisible powers. It was barely visible, for the glass it was made of looked very much like ice, and the childlike Empress's white gown and white hair could hardly be distinguished from the snow round about. She had travelled many days and nights. The four powers had carried her through blinding rain and scorching sun, through darkness and moonlight, onward and onward, just as she had ordered, no matter where. She was prepared for a long journey and all manner of hardship, since she knew that the old man of Wandering Mountain could be everywhere or nowhere. Still, the four invisible powers were not guided entirely by chance in their choice of an itinerary. As often as not, the nothing, which had already swallowed up whole regions, left only a single path open. Sometimes the possibilities narrowed down to a bridge, a tunnel, or a gateway, and sometimes they were forced to carry the litter with the deathly hill Empress over the waves of the sea. These carriers saw no difference between liquid and solid. Tireless and persevering, they had finally reached the frozen heights of the Mountain of Destiny, and they would go on climbing until the childlike Empress gave them another order. But she lay still on her cushions. Her eyes were closed and she said nothing. The last words she had spoken were the "no matter where" she had said on leaving the ivory tower. The litter was moving through a deep ravine, so narrow that there was barely room for it to pass. The snow was several feet deep, but the invisible carriers did not sink in or even leave footprints. It was very dark at the bottom of this ravine, which admittedly only a narrow strip of daylight came through. The path was on a steady incline, and the higher the litter climbed, the nearer the daylight seemed. And then suddenly the walls levelled off, opening up a view of a vast white expanse. This was the summit, for the Mountain of Destiny culminated not, like most other mountains, in a single peak, but in this high plateau, which was as large as a whole country. But then, surprisingly enough, a smaller, odd-looking mountain arose in the midst of the plateau. It was rather tall and narrow, something like the ivory tower, but glittering blue. It consisted of innumerable, strangely shaped stone teeth, which jutted into the sky like great inverted icicles. And about halfway up the mountain, 3 such teeth supported an egg the size of a house. Behind the egg, large blue columns resembling the pipes of an enormous organ rose in a semicircle. The great egg had a circular opening which might have been a door or a window, and in that opening a face appeared. The face was looking straight at the litter. The childlike Empress opened her eyes. "Stop," she said softly. The invisible power stopped. The childlike Empress sat up. "It's the old man of Wandering Mountain," she said. "I must go the last stretch of the way alone. Whatever may happen, wait here for me." The face in the circular opening vanished. The childlike Empress stepped out of the litter and started across the great snow field. It was hard going, for she was barefooted, and there was an icy crust on the snow. At every step she broke through, and the ice cut her tender feet. The wind tugged at her white hair and her gown. At last she came to the Blue Mountain, and stood facing the smooth stone teeth. The dark circular opening disgorged a long ladder, which longer than there could possibly have been room for in the egg. It soon extended to the foot of the Blue Mountain, and when the childlike Empress took hold of it, she saw that it consisted of ladders, which were fastened together. Each rung of the ladder was a line. The childlike Empress started climbing, and as she climbed from rung to rung, she read the words: turn back and go away. For come what will and come what may, never in any time or place must you and I meet face to face. To you alone, O childlike one, the way is barred. To you alone, turn back, for never shall beginning seek the end of all. The consequence of your intrusion can only be extreme confusion. She stopped to rest and looked up. She still had a long way to go. So far she hadn't even gone halfway. Old man of Wandering Mountain, she said aloud, if you don't want us to meet, you needn't have written me this ladder. It's your disinvitation that brings me. And she went on climbing. What you achieve and what you are is recorded by me, the chronicler. Letters unchangeable and dead freeze what the living did and said. Therefore, by coming here to me, you invite catastrophe. This is the end of what you once began. You will never be old, and I, old man, was never young. What you awaken, I lay to rest. Be not mistaken. It is forbidden that life should see itself in dead eternity. Again she had to stop to catch her breath. By then the childlike empress was eye up, and the ladder was swaying like a branch in the snowstorm. Clinging to the icy letters that formed the rungs of the ladder, she climbed the rest of the way. But if you still refuse to heed the warning of the ladder's creed, if you are still prepared to do what in time and space is forbidden you, I won't attempt to hold you back. Then welcome to the old man's shack. When the childlike empress had those last rungs behind her, she sighed and looked down. Her wide gown was in tatters, for it had caught on every bend and crossbar of the message ladder. Oh well, she had known all along that letters were hostile to her. She felt the same way about them. From the ladder she stepped through the circular opening in the egg. Instantly it closed behind her, and she stood, motionless in the darkness, waiting to see what would happen next. Nothing at all happened for quite some time. At length she said softly, "Here I am." Her voice echoed, as in a large empty room. Or was it another, much deeper voice that had answered her in the same words? Little by little she made out a faint, reddish glow in the darkness. It came from an open book, which hovered in midair at the center of the egg-shaped room. It was tilted in such a way that she could see the binding, which was of copper-colored silk, and on the binding, as on the gem which the childlike empress wore around her neck, she saw an oval formed by two snakes biting each other's tail. Inside this oval was printed the title, The Neverending Story. Bastian's thoughts were in a whirl. This was the very same book that he was reading? He looked again. Yes, no doubt about it. It was the book he had in his hand. How could this book exist inside itself? The childlike empress had come closer. On the other side of the hovering book she now saw a man's face. It was bathed in a bluish light. The light came from the print of the book, which was bluish-green. The man's face was as deeply furrowed as if it had been carved in the bark of an ancient tree. His beard was long and white, and his eyes were so deep in their sockets that she could not see them. He was wearing a dark monk's robe with a hood, and in his hand he was holding a stylus, with which he was writing in the book. He did not look up. The childlike empress stood watching him in silence. He was not really writing. His stylus glided slowly over the empty page, and the letters and words appeared as though of their own accord. The childlike empress read what was being written, and it was exactly what was happening at the same moment. The childlike empress read what was being written. "You write down everything that happens," she said. "Everything that I write down happens," was the answer. spoken in the deep, dark voice that had come to her like an echo of her own voice. Strange to say, the old man of Wandering Mountain had not opened his mouth. He had written her words and his, and she had heard them as though merely remembering that he had just spoken. "Are you and I and all Fantastica?" she asked. "Are we all recorded in this book?" He wrote, and at the same time she heard his answer. "No, you've got it wrong. This book is all Fantastica, and you and I." "But where is this book?" And he wrote the answer, "In the book." "Then it's all a reflection of a reflection?" she asked. He wrote, and she heard him say, "What does one see in a mirror reflected in a mirror? Do you know that, golden-eyed commander of wishes?" The childlike empress said nothing for a while, and the old man wrote that she said nothing. Then she said softly, "I need your help." "I knew it," he said and wrote. "Yes," she said. "I suppose you would. You are Fantastica's memory. You know everything that has happened up to this moment. But couldn't you leaf ahead in your book and see what's going to happen?" "Empty pages," was the answer. "I can only look back at what has happened. I was able to read it while I was writing it, and I know it because I have read it, and I wrote it because it happened. The never-ending story writes itself by my hand." "Then you don't know why I've come to you." "No." And as he was writing, she heard the dark voice, "And I wish you hadn't. By my hand, everything becomes fixed and final. You too, golden-eyed commander of wishes. This egg is your grave and your coffin. You have entered into the memory of Fantastica. How do you expect to leave here?" "Every egg," she said, "is the beginning of a new life." "True," the old man wrote and said, "but only if the shell bursts open." "You can open it," cried the childlike empress. "You let me in." "Your power let you in. But now that you're here, your power is gone. We are shut up here for all time. Truly, you shouldn't have come. This is the end of the never-ending story." The childlike empress smiled. She didn't seem troubled in the least. "You and I," she said, "can't prolong it, but there is someone who can." "Only a human," wrote the old man, "can make a fresh start." "Yes," she replied, "a human." Slowly, the old man of Wandering Mountain raised his eyes and saw the childlike empress for the first time. His gaze seemed to come from the darkest distance, from the end of the universe. She stood up to it, answered it with her golden eyes. A silent, immobile battle was fought between them. At length, the old man bent over his book and wrote, "For you too, there is a borderline. Respect it." "I will," she said. "But the one of whom I speak, the one for whom I am waiting, crossed it long ago. He is reading this book while you are writing it. He hears every word we are saying. He is with us." "That is true," she heard the old man's voice as he was writing. "He too is part and parcel of the never-ending story, for it is his own story." "Tell me the story," the childlike empress commanded. "You, who are the memory of Fantastica, tell me the story from the beginning, word for word, as you have written it." The old man's writing hand began to tremble. "If I do that, I shall have to write everything all over again. And what I write will happen again." "So be it," said the childlike Empress. Bastian was beginning to feel uncomfortable. What was she going to do? It had something to do with him, but if even the old man of Wandering Mountain was trembling... The old man wrote and said, "If the never-ending story contains itself, then the world will end with this book." And the childlike Empress answered, "But if the hero comes to us, new life can be born. Now the decision is up to him." "You are rootless indeed," the old man said and wrote. "We shall enter the circle of eternal return from which there is no escape." "Not for us," she replied, and her voice was no longer gentle, but as hard and clear as a diamond. "Not for him, unless he saves us all." "Do you really want to entrust everything to a human?" "I do." But then she added more softly, "Or have you a better idea?" After a long silence, the old man's dark voice said, "No." He bent low over the book in which he was writing. His face was hidden by his hood. "Then do what I ask." Submitting to her will, the old man of Wandering Mountain began telling the never-ending story from the beginning. At that moment, the light cast by the pages of the book changed color. It became reddish, like the letters that now formed under the man's stylus. His monk's habit and the hood also took on the color of copper, and as he wrote, his deep, dark voice resounded. Bastian too heard it quite clearly, yet he did not understand the first words the old man said. They sounded like Scoobdloo Ridnerock Dornock Lorak. Strange, Bastian thought. Why is the old man suddenly talking a foreign language? Or was it some sort of magic spell? The old man's voice went on, and Bastian couldn't help listening. This inscription could be seen on the glass door of a small shop, but naturally this was only the way it looked if you were inside the dimly lit shop, looking out at the street through the plate glass door. Outside it was a grey, cold, rainy November morning. The rain ran down the glass and over the ornate letters. Through the glass there was nothing to be seen but the rain-splotched wall across the street. Bastian was rather disappointed. "I don't know that story," he thought. "That's not in the book I've been reading." "Oh well, it only goes to show that I've been mistaken this whole time. I really thought the old man would start telling the never-ending story from the beginning." Suddenly the door was opened so violently that a little cluster of brass bells tinkled wildly, taking quite some time to calm down. The cause of this hubbub was a fat little boy of 10 or 12. His wet, dark brown hair hung down over his face, his coat was soaked and dripping, and he was carrying a school satchel slung over his shoulder. He was rather pale and out of breath, but despite the hurry he had been in a moment before, he was standing in the open doorway as though rooted on the spot. As Bastian read this and listened to the deep, dark voice of the old man of Wandering Mountain, a roaring started up in his ears, and he saw spots before his eyes. Why, this was all about him, and it was the never-ending story. He, Bastian, was a character in the book which, until now, he had thought he was reading. And heaven only knew who else might be reading it at the exact same time, also supposing himself to be just a reader. And now Bastian was afraid. He felt unable to breathe, as though shut up in an invisible prison. He didn't want to read anymore. He wanted to stop. But the deep, dark voice of the old man of Wandering Mountain went on. And there was nothing Bastian could do about it. He held his hands over his ears, but it was no use, because the voice came from inside him. He tried desperately to tell himself, though he knew it wasn't true, that the resemblance to his own story was some crazy accident. But the deep, dark voice went on. And ever so clearly he heard it saying, "Where are your manners? If you had any, you'd have introduced yourself." "My name is Bastian," said the boy. "Bastian Balthazar Bux." In that moment, Bastian made a profound discovery. You wish for something, you've wanted it for years, and you're sure you want it, as long as you know you can't have it. But if all at once it looks as though your wish might come true, you suddenly find yourself wishing you had never wished for any such thing. That is exactly how it was with Bastian. Now that he was in danger of getting his wish, he would have liked best to run away. But since you can't run away unless you have some idea where you're at, Bastian did something perfectly absurd. He turned over on his back like a beetle and played dead. He made himself as small as possible and pretended he wasn't there. The old man of Wandering Mountain went on telling and writing the story of how Bastian had stolen the book, how he had fled to the schoolhouse attic and begun to read. And then Atreyu's quest began all over again. He spoke with Morla, the aged one, and he found Falkor in Iramul's net beside the deep chasm, and heard Bastian's cry of fear. Once again he was cursed by old Urgel and lectured by Engiwuk. He passed through the 3 magic gates, entered into Bastian's image, and spoke with Uyulala. And then came the Wind Giants and Spook City and Gmork, followed by Atreyu's rescue and the flight to the Ivory Tower. And in between, everything that Bastian had done, how he had lit the candles, how he had seen the childlike Empress, and how she had waited for him in vain. Once again she started on her way to find the old man of Wandering Mountain. Once again she climbed the ladder of letters and entered the egg. Once again the conversation between her and the old man was related word for word, and once again the old man of Wandering Mountain began to write and tell the never-ending story. At that point, the story began all over again, unchanged and unchangeable, and ended once again with the meeting between the childlike Empress and the old man of Wandering Mountain, who began once again to write and tell the never-ending story. And so it would go on forever and ever, for any change in the sequence of events was unthinkable. Only he, Bastian, could do anything about it, and he would have to do something, or else he too would be included in the circle. It seemed to him that this story had been repeated 1,000 times, as though there were no before and after, and everything had happened at once. Now he realized why the old man's hand trembled. The circle of eternal return was an end without an end. Bastian was unaware of the tears that were running down from his cheeks. Close to fainting, he suddenly cried out, "Moonchild, I'm coming!" In that moment, several things happened at once. The shell of the great egg was dashed to pieces by some overwhelming power. A rumbling of thunder was heard, and then the storm wind came roaring from afar. It blew from the pages of the book that Bastian was holding on his knees, and the pages began to flutter wildly. Bastian felt the wind in his hair and face. He could scarcely breathe. The candle flames in the 7-armed candelabra danced, wavered, and lay flat. Then another, still more violent wind blew into the book, and the candles went out. The clock in the belfry struck 12.